Welcome back to Professor Sky's class on Haiti, the most important country in the world. Listen, the views went down when I went back to do more theater on Aimé Césaire and La Tragédie du Roi Christophe. And I understand, literature is not going to get people as interested as history. My students today, they were overjoyed to be talking about history. But it's part of what I do as a professor. I try to mix things up, not get things to be too consistent or keep them consistent but not do the same things over and over again. So I'm happy that we took that cultural interlude. But now we're going to get into history. We are going to get into the complicated legacy of Boyer or Boyer, Boyer. We're going to talk about what I'm going to be calling the infinite debt and eternal shame of what France did to Haiti in order to recognize it, and we will even end it by talking about an entire different way of living, an entire different way of living that the citizens of Haiti figured out and resisted the capitalist model, the plantation model. So let's get to today's class. All right. Continue to share. Let's just make sure this looks correct. Okay. Students and friends, I am Professor Sky. My name is perhaps known to you. I've undertaken to teach about Haiti. I want curiosity and a thirst for complex understanding to reign in this class. I am working to help that happen. Unite yourself, students, with me and learn for the same cause. So today's class, I don't know, I think I'll call it Boyer and the Infinite Indemnity or maybe something more flashy. Again, I encourage you to take notes. Online learning is very passive. So if you take notes, it might actually help you to remember. I just watched a whole YouTube video about the history of toasters. And I feel like if I had written it down, maybe I would have learned more than just kind of passively watching it. So this is the book that we're reading in this class, Haiti, The Aftershocks of History by Laurent Dubois. And I just want to really point out what makes it so great as a history book is that it's not just a textbook. It really does have a narrative theme to it, which I think helps to make it more interesting. And so the example is this little poetic interlude, a little poetic negritude interlude that's trying to tie together a little bit of what we did by talking about the play with this. So if you don't remember, negritude was a literary, philosophical, social movement of the 20th century which put forth the idea that there's a sort of universal experience that can be understood by people of African descent, and that people of African descent all over the world have to unite to sort of reclaim their history from their perspective, to enforce their dignity, to sort of try to fight the white supremacy that has ruled over most of the world for much of existence. So that's the concept of negritude. And in that example, I had you and perhaps my students read a play that was about a black figure from a black person about sort of black issues. And here we're going to talk about the Bois Quémont ritual. So before this guy, this little picture down here, this colored poet, this person of mixed race, Bois Quémont, and this goes for like the entire revolution. The idea of what it was, how it was remembered, was framed by this French guy, Dalmas, not to be confused with grape leaves. He talked about the barbarism of the enslaved. He described the people who participated as ignorant and stupid, talked about their absurd and bloodthirsty religion. So Dumesle, which is his name, is this fascinating character because he wasn't a fan of Toussaint, he wasn't a fan of Dessalines. He was mixed race, he was colored, he was in the South. He was sort of ideologically against a lot of the kingdom of Haiti, but he still went up to the north to discover what actually happened at Bois Quémont. And what he said about it, what he wrote about it, is what we remember. He is the person who wrote this poem. Now, he says this is what Dutty Boukman said. Maybe Boukman said this. Maybe he said something like it. But what I'm trying to emphasize is the same thing that Césaire did, where he told this story from a black perspective of what happened to black people, as opposed to a white perspective, as opposed to one that is entirely informed by and in service of white supremacy. It changes the nature of the story. So this is how he described the speech. Good Lord, who hath made the sun that shines upon us, that riseth from the sea, who maketh the storm to roar and governeth the thunders. The Lord is hidden in the heavens, up there he watcheth over us. The Lord seeth what the whites have done. Their God commandeth crimes, ours giveth blessings upon us. The good Lord hath ordained vengeance. He will give us strength to our arms and courage to our hearts. He shall sustain us. Cast down the image of the God of the whites, because he maketh the tears to flow from our eyes. Hearken unto liberty, speaketh now in all your hearts. This is a poem which is known in part or in whole since it was written by many, many Haitians. It is a part of the national fabric. And it's this guy who wrote it. And I love this story. I love the story that it is being described because this is as the national mythology is being described is being formed. You know, does this count as a form of negritude? I would say it does. Also, they happen to mention that he read this guy Buffon, whose name means clown, and he is truly a clown. That's an insult to clowns. Clowns are cool. This guy's not. He's basically one of the French inventors of racism, but he was able to read and discern uh, some things that Buffon said that he thought were interesting. Anyways, so let's get to Boyer. Let's get to Boyer. First question: do you remember how Boyer ended up in Haiti? Now he was born there. Okay, he was born in the South, much like Rigaud, much like Petillon, born free and successful family that owned land, all that. But he was kicked out. You know, after that War of the South with the Toussaint, everybody, he was kicked out. So how did he get back? I asked my students. I waited. I waited, and thank God, one of them sheepishly raised their hand and said, "The expedition." I said, "That's right, the Leclerc expedition." It's meaningful. Okay. It's meaningful that the way that Boyer and Petillon ended up back in Haiti was through Napoleon's attempt to divide and conquer, to hit Toussaint where he was weakest, where he had the least amount of support. So that's how Boyer got back to France. But I'm not going to talk about a lot of details of his reign. Just the ones that I find most important for this class. So Pétion died in 1818. He was helped by one of the greatest allies of those who fought against the French army in the War of Freedom, Général Moustique de la Fièvre Jaune. Okay, he died of the yellow fever. And then up north, if you remember, Christophe died in 1820. Well, he had a stroke and then he shot himself, right? So what's going to happen? Christophe doesn't have any sons, and he's not popular anyway. So things were fairly ripe for Boyer to unify the country, and that's what he did. 1820, 1821, he unified the country. It's entirely possible that we'd be living in a world with North and South Haiti. It's really possible. They're very different. They were very different cultures. They had different influences. There's a lot of variation between them. So, um, it's an interesting fact of history that all throughout this class, we've been talking about the differences between North and South. And it's amazing that they ended up reuniting. So he had a 25-year reign, which for the history of Haiti is fairly remarkable. As a reminder, the entire revolution up until that point, Bois Quémont, which Dumesle so eloquently described with his poetic flair, was only 27 years. So almost the entire time that this, basically doubling the time since freedom, that's how long Boyer was reigning. So let's put forth some of his accomplishments. I'm going to put these in quotes because I'm being a little snarky here. Some of these are very dubious accomplishments. He did unite Haiti. He did unite the entire island. He did gain recognition from France, which is how you should say that. Okay. Boyer gained recognition from France because it's a very painful thing. We'll be discussing that right now. He did encourage American migration. This is before the 1860s. Okay, this is before emancipation in America, and there were a lot of freed Black Americans and enslaved Black Americans who tried to find their way down to Haiti. Some of them left, some of them stayed. He's what word is that, Sky? Strengthened. I meant to say strengthened. He strengthened the military and he improved the economy. I put that in quotes because he mainly improved the economy for the very rich, not for the poor. Um, there's a series of divisions that are going to get stronger and stronger throughout this class. The rural and urban, the city, the countryside, the elite and the peasants, the coloreds and the blacks, sort of. It's more tied into the concepts of the elites and the peasants. How are those divided? And of course, North and South. These divisions are really, really strong, and a lot of them were made worse, were exacerbated by Boyer. I say that in like every class. I like the word exacerbated. I'm trying to I'm trying to teach you all that word. I don't know why. So, you could call him the unifier. Okay, in 1820, he unified the two halves of Haiti. 1822, all of Hispaniola. Because you see, Santo Domingo broke free of Spain. The Republic of Spanish Haiti is declared, but they needed help. And they asked Boyer. He said, but of course, which resulted in all of it just belonging to Haiti. So, you see that the unification ended 1 year after his death. That's not a coincidence. Now, Spain already had a lot of holdings in the New World, and it wasn't as developed, because it wasn't as profitable as the French side was, but that's what happened. And then we have this moment, gaining recognition from France. Now, I'm not saying that this is a travesty on the same level as the transatlantic slave trade, but it is one of the most shameful events in the history of France, in the history of the world, frankly. What I'm about to describe, this debt and this loan is incomprehensibly evil. And because it's not a question of deaths, I can't tell you I can't tell you like 60,000 people were killed in one day and the kids were buried and the people were burned, all that. I can't do that. So it might not actually hit home to you. But without a doubt, when people say, why is Haiti like this? Why Santo Domingo is not like this? The Dominican Republic isn't like this. Jamaica is not like this. Why isn't it like this? It's primarily because of this. It's primarily because of the debt that they had to pay for their own freedom. So let's take a little bit of time to discuss this. Eternal shame to the French. Hey, Americans, you're not off the hook either. We really benefited from this, and this loan and the repayment of it was part of what justified our invasion of Haiti and our illegal occupation of Haiti. So, there's no good guys here. But let's get to the story here. So, if you remember, Pétion tried. He put forth this idea, but even he knew it was politically toxic, that it wouldn't work. Okay. But Boyer is there, and he is acting alone. He's not consulting with the Senate. He is not consulting with his advisors. He is there alone with the agents of Charles X. Don't call him Charles X, okay? That'll make you think of Charles Xavier from X-Men. Charles Xavier is a cool dude. Charles X, punk. A terrible guy. Super terrible guy. But anyways, who was Charles X? So as a reminder, when France lost the Napoleonic Wars, the monarchy was imposed on them by the forces that beat them, like England. Like, you have to have a monarchy. You have to have this old system. You don't get to have a democracy. That's done. You tried that. It worked, but we won't let it happen. So Charles X, he is the king of France. And he's a friend of the big whites. And this is where I just commented to my students this fact. If you remember in my description of the French Revolution, the reason we say left wing and right wing is because of the French Revolution. They were trying to develop a new way of living, a new system after the monarchy was going away, or while the monarchy was being reconfigured. And the people who were on the left wing tended to represent the third estate. So we're talking the bourgeoisie, we're talking the working class, we're talking the peasants, and they generally favored more equality more democracy, and on the right side, the right wing was people more aligned with the first two estates, with the church and with the nobility. So they were more in favor of a monarchy, hierarchy, therefore inequality. Therefore, the people on the right wing tended to be more in favor of inequality. Therefore, they tended to be more in favor of racism and racist policies and policies which disadvantaged the disadvantaged. That is, at its core, the right wing values. Throughout the entire revolution, there's a lot of left and right, back and forth, different sides. How are we going to rule this country? What are we going to do? So when the king gets to be, when there's a new king now in France, when there's a king in France, that means, hey, the left wing is ignored. Left wing, we're getting rid of free speech. We're getting rid of everything. Okay, we're going back old school monarchy. So everybody who is on the right wing is now happy. And when the right wing is in power, it means more inequality and more racism. In France, I'm in France. I'm talking about France, everybody. What, what kind of historical parallel do you think I would be drawing? That's ridiculous. No, no, no. This isn't a political channel. No. This is just history. It's history. Okay. So the big whites, les grands blancs, someone corrected me and said they don't like it when I use the term big whites, but I couldn't figure out why they wanted me to translate it to grand blanc. So I'm just going to say both. If that was you, please feel free to tell me what exactly you meant by that. Meaning he was a friends of the planters, the people who owned the properties, the people who lost their property during the revolution. So I'm getting lots of messages over here. Sorry about that. But Charles was in a tough spot. He could not recognize that Haiti was independent, right? He couldn't. Because like to do that would be to tell the rest of the empire, oh, if you break free, it's chill. It's all good. You can break free. You can be a you can leave France. It's okay. And then you get to be your own thing. But also he couldn't do anything. You know, how many white French soldiers had to die on that little island for France to learn its lesson to leave him alone? They're not going to invade. They can't do that. So what are they going to do with this land? But you see, he had all of these rich, powerful landowners who wanted to be even richer. They wanted to be as rich as they used to be when they owned people, when they were part of the slave trade. So Charles X, he's got to listen to them. That's who he met. That's who matters to him. So he gives a royal order. Okay, I asked my students this. What's funny about the King of France giving a royal order to the people of Haiti? I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, we're done. Could the King of Jordan give a royal order to Americans? Can the King of England give a royal order to, I don't know, the people of Iceland? Right? How can you? But they couldn't figure out how else to do it because in order to have some kind of official treaty with somebody, you have to acknowledge that they are independent. And the main thing he can't do is acknowledge that Haiti exists. Remember in the play, they have to keep calling it Saint Domingue. It's been called Haiti since 1804. It's been independent since 1804. And here he is having to treat it like it's still a part of France in order to grant them their freedom. So let's read this royal order. Let's read part of this royal order. Okay? Part one, ports of the French part of Saint Domingue. So they're not calling it Haiti at this point because the Haitians are paying for the right to call it Haiti. Ports of French part of Saint Domingue are open to all nations. This was what the big whites were fighting for back when they had these plantations, but this is indicating, okay, so they can trade that way. They had to pay 150 million franc indemnity to France. Okay. So, what is this indemnity? See it down there. Indemnity. What does it mean? Here's a translation for you: a sum of money paid as compensation especially a sum exacted by a victor in war as a condition of peace. Read that again. Exacted by a victor in war as a condition of peace. This means if Haiti pays France an indemnity, it is officially recognizing that France won the War of Independence. And they, therefore, got to ask Haiti to pay this indemnity. You know, when we defeated Germany in World War One, they had to pay a huge indemnity because we won, right? Like that's part of history. So here's the absurdity, the insane, dark obscurity, the absurdity of this that a people who were at that point, again, the majority of Haitians at the time of liberation were born in Africa. So we're talking about a group of people who were dragged from their homes, put onto a boat, forced to work, fight for their own freedom, and they now have to pay because of the property that they took, both themselves as property and the land itself that the whites had to flee. That's what they are paying back as losers of an independence war. And now the island is completely free. It is completely independent of France. So good job. 21 years after independence, they are observed as being independent. And this is what Haiti won. It can now be officially known by the French as Haiti. It is officially accepted in the world stage. It is officially now a part of the world. I told my students this story. My dad had this like crazy, well, I'm sorry, this friend, very weird guy, who thought he was a country. So like Larry was his name. Like, Larry, the UN, the representative of Larry. That was how Haiti was treated. That's how it was treated by the rest of the world. Like, oh no, 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 it's still France. Even if France isn't there, we can't recognize it. We don't want to annoy the French. We don't want to encourage slave revolts. So we're just going to treat Haiti like it doesn't exist. Right here, Boyer has just secured recognition, international recognition for Haiti, which was necessary. But was it worth the cost? That's the question. Man, Larry was. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. He did have some deal with the post office where he could use his thumbnail, his thumbprint, to send mail. He didn't have to have a stamp. Anyways, interesting guy. So he had to sign. They had to sign there. So what is 50 million francs? I don't know, 150 million francs, maybe in today's money. It's really hard to determine because it's also gold. So what's that worth then? And he had to sign there. If you don't, reasons why I like this book, it's great with narrative. They just happen to tell the story of Jorien de la Gravière. And this is a story so unbelievable, I can barely believe it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to ask him. I have a cousin who wrote a book about ships. It's called Ships of the World. Really cool guy. And I need to ask him about this because this guy has the most interesting ship life you can possibly imagine. He was a captain of a slave ship pre-revolution who brought enslaved people from Africa to Haiti. That's the first time. If you did you watch my play coverage? All right. If you watched one of my videos about the play, you'll remember they dramatize how it felt for a um a Haitian peasant, just a citizen, just an inhabitant, to see a ship from France. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. Whenever a ship shows up, it's terrifying. They might be invading again. They might be trying to re-enslave everybody. They are so vulnerable. They're just living on a half of a tiny little island in the middle of the desert, surrounded by, I mean, the middle of the ocean, the middle of the sea, the Caribbean, surrounded by hostile lands and hostile people. It's unbelievable. So, let's think about Glavier. Let's think about the times that he came. The first time he came was a part of the slave ship. Okay. Second time he came, he worked under Leclerc Rochambeau. Hey, maybe he brought Boyer back. Maybe he brought a whole bunch of soldiers back. Okay. The second time he comes to Haiti, it's under those auspices. And the third time is he is in charge of the fleet that is right outside threatening the port for Charles X. So, Boyer, he did a bad thing, but did he have a choice? Whether or not they were bluffing, we don't know, but we do know that they were ready to kill everybody. Or at least that was his perspective. So, did he even have a choice? Did he even have a choice, or was he coerced? And here's a warship named after him. Now, it could be named after his son, who had the same, same name, but that's the French warship, the Johann de la Gravière. So, there you go. So, what was now the problem for Boyer, who had to pay? Look at all this money I don't have. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the best memes of all time. I know it's top font, lower font. I know it's an old meme format, but it's very good. Haiti did not have the money for this. They had to pay 115 million 150 million francs. 30 million of that was due in 7 months. The GDP of Haiti in that year was around 500,000 francs. So I did the math. And if Haiti could have 6 years of GDP in 7 months, they'd be able to make the first payment. Look at all this money they don't have. How much have I been talking to you in this class about money and about land and about how Haiti is so profitable only if the plantation system works? And the last thing you can ask the Haitians to do is go back into the plantation system, no matter how many people keep trying. So look at all this money they don't have. So they got a loan. They got a loan from the Banque de France. 6% interest, 20% fee. That was what they were offered. The final payment of this would be made in 1947. I said 1947. Okay, the Yankees played the Dodgers in that World Series, 1947. 2 years after World War II, 1947. My dad was 7 years old, 1947. That was the last payment. New York Times has a nice little explanation of this debt and its impact. By 1911, $2.53 out of every $3 that Haiti earned from coffee taxes, its most important source of revenue, went to paying debts held by French investors. So for every $3, they got 47 cents in 1911. So that means if you are a Haitian and you are working as hard as you possibly can as a coffee planter, you're doing everything right. You're doing everything that the whole world wants you to do. You're participating in global trade. You're recognized. Your great great grandfather fought in a war to free you and your generations to come. And because of that, you have to pay for the right of not being enslaved. You have to pay $2.53 out of every $3 that you earn. So I told you it's not the same thing as the slave trade, but it is unbelievably evil. I think it's as, anyways. I love that this is mentioned in the New York Times article I found. In France, meanwhile, was a time of prosperity. The cafes in Paris overflowed, with many of its patrons drinking coffee cultivated by the debt hobbled Haitians a half a world away. So, the French, they're great. It's a great culture, amazing culture. They're the ones who figured out that instead of having a cafe facing each other, you face the street. That changed all of civilization. That's part of the reason why French are so fashionable, because they're always drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, and looking at each other all the time. So you have to imagine these cafes where surrealism is going to be invented, and Dadaism and existentialism, and all these great these fine moments by these inspired people who are so cultivated and so fine, and it's off of the blood, again, the blood of the Haitians. Remember how the French Revolution was largely fueled by cafes with people hopped up on coffee, and a lot of that coffee came from the slave labor in Haiti. Well, here we are again. Here we are again. that, there's a chance that the person who pays for the coffee made more off of that cup of coffee than the person who harvested it. That's the world. In April, the French president said that making Haiti pay for its independence was unjust. Sorry, one second. I'm sorry, that's news? That's news? It is news because France has not wanted to admit this. It is news when that's announced. Can you imagine if it meant something for an American president to say, on on second thought, slavery was not good, right? It's not even a question. But here we are. And the Haitians in 2022 asked for $20 billion in reparations, which is nothing, nothing compared to what they actually lost. What they lost is in the hundreds of billions. What they lost is incalculable because how are you supposed to form a nation if you're mostly just paying off a debt for your own existence? America just gave Venezuela $20 billion 2 weeks ago. Anyways, and if they wanted to look for a better rate, got bad news for you. They'll send in the gunships. So they were forced to sign in there. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's what happened. 30% of the nation's money went to pay debts, 50% went to the military, only 1% went to education. Pétion and Christophe were at war with each other. They went to war with each other. It was a civil war, everything. They were two different places. But there's one thing they definitely agreed on. They emphasized the importance of education. Boyer didn't. And part of it makes sense because he is helping to create a kind of elite class in Haiti that will always try to benefit from and exploit the lower classes. Getting all sorts of messages. Why are my notifications not turned off while I'm recording this? Anyways, all sorts. So they want the people uneducated. They want them in that subservient position. They want them in the fields. Okay, Pétion at least came up with a métayage system. It was a little bit better, whatever. Christophe had the Code Henri, which in some ways was okay. There's a lot of work being done by leaders for labor codes that made sense and labor codes that were good. Boyer came up with the Code Rural, which is the worst of all of them. Laborers cannot leave their plantation. They cannot start farms. They cannot start shops. And he helped to create a police force to enforce it, which, what does that look like? What was he trying to do? Now, listen, he was never able to completely enforce this rural code, but it shows what they wanted. They really wanted a return to the plantation system. And my favorite Haitian historian, Jean Casimir, or sociologist, had a more clear way of talking about it. He called this an attempt at second slavery. In order to make the situation of the cultivator as close as possible to that of a slave, Boyer's rural code had to convert the property owners into planters, inhabitants, and colonists. So the people who owned are now becoming like the old big whites. That was not the case for Haitian cultivator. Boyer's republic therefore codified the contours of a second slavery 3 decades after general emancipation. Boyer's rural code never really left the drawers of his desk, but the fact that it wasn't applied doesn't diminish the importance of the idea that a second slavery for his reflection there. That was the goal. Okay, I'm so sorry about all these messages. And the question is, what force could combat this plantation system? What could counter it? Well, we go back to Jean Casimir, a counter plantation system. The good news was more land was distributed and more people were actively fighting against the plantation system and finding a different way. How did the Haitian peasants reply? The labor, the labor's resistance. This is from Dubois. The laborers' resistance made it impossible for Boyer to carry out his grand plans of reviving sugar production. As it turned out, he was not able to realize his goals. Even on his own 2,000-acre plantation, after years of effort, only 2% of his land was successfully planted with cane. So even the most powerful person, even the dictatorial force, could not succeed in getting this done. So this is going to lead us to do something, to talk about something which is a very special peculiarity of Haitian culture, the laku. Now, the way I teach this is I have my students draw it and take notes. And they did some good drawings. I'll share them with you next class. So I describe it and have them draw it. What is a laku? Simply put, it is a group of houses around a common yard. In a court, like a courtyard in French, comes from the French word cour. So la cour becomes la cour. Okay. It is described in Dubois as an egalitarian system without a state. So it is outside of the state. Whenever they interact with the state, with the government of Haiti, it is it is on their terms, not the state's terms. It is made up of mostly extended families. So you have to imagine your family, your uncle's family, your grandparents, maybe your aunts on another side's family, just like extended families all kind of living together. And all around would be farming plots that belong to everybody, but are sort of more like they're used for everybody, but they're owned by certain members of the family, whichever part of the land they own, whichever part their part of the family owns. Okay. And this created enough food for everybody, and there's enough to take to the market to trade for other foods, other goods, and there's even enough for some people to export. Now, a lot of this was dependent on the land itself. Some people had less fertile land. Some people had, like some laku had like profitable land on one side and not on the other. It's all very complex. But this was the system that they created, and it was self-regulated. There would be sort of like a council of elders kind of thing, mostly old men, but it was fairly unofficial, but they would be able to control what was happening. And then when you have questions like, where do people poop? Whose land belongs to whom? They would be able to settle those things without needs of the courts. And for the most part, because they were all one village, they were all one people, they were mostly one family, it was not as contentious as might be, in a European city. They also put family tombs in the middle of the court, in the laku. And I asked my students about this. I was like, doesn't this seem a little funny? I mean, would you do that? Like put it, like having the tomb so prevalent. And this is where I started to explain to them the difference between spiritualities. That in the African spiritualities, and again, a lot of the people who started Laku were born in Africa or are first or second generation. A lot of their spirituality comes from Africa, which is why it was also a place for voodoo ceremonies. Now, listen, we're going to do an entire class on voodoo, but I'm trying to think of metaphors. So the way to think about it, I think, is like this. Imagine a Jewish guy, a Muslim guy, and a Christian guy are swept up and taken to Mars and enslaved in Mars and deprived of their languages and deprived of their religious practices. They don't all practice the same religion, but there's enough overlap. There's enough general agreement, kind of monotheistic view, whatever, that over a couple centuries, they would have to acknowledge the Martian god, Zerblots, the god of Mars, right? They'd have to say, "Oh, hail Zerblots! Zerblots is the greatest. I love Zerblots." Never heard of him before I got thrown into the ship and forced to cut sugar cane on Mars, but that's fine. I'll worship Zerblots, but they're going to keep their own religious traditions and practices going. But they're going to be sort of a mixture of different views and perspectives and practices from the earth where they come from. So the similarities here that we're finding, among the similarities are desire for voodoo ceremonies and also a place for family tombs, because this ties into the fact that this is very tied into African traditions. In many ways, it's more like an African village than a European town. And that's what everyone's trying to do to Haiti. That's what everyone's been trying to do to Haiti since it started. Turn it into a European town. Turn it into the Paris of the Antilles. Turn it into a European city. A European city. Why are we taking Africans and putting them in there to make a European city? Like, if Africans wanted European cities, then they would have made Europeans. You know what I'm saying? It's like, no wonder. Like, anyways, what we're talking about is these traditions, and especially an emphasis on anti-salaried work. Because how does a laku help the country? How does it help the GDP? How does it pay down the debt? How does it pay for the military? It doesn't. It doesn't at all. It's self-contained. It is anti-plantation, anti-salary. It is for the family and for the individual. And it is providing a kind of life which is the life that the people wanted the whole time. This was what they were fighting for. They weren't fighting to be the ones who owned the plantations. They weren't fighting for the ones to be on the ports. They just wanted to be free, able to care for their families, and live a life of dignity and peace. And they could find that in the laku. So we'll be studying that as well more. If you want to keep up with this class, if you want to keep up with the reading, I will tell you the next things that we are reading in this book is page 112 to 134. We're going to be talking about the fall of Boyer. We're going to be talking about like this like rebel leader who's like dressed up like a farmer. That's awesome. So, anyways, that's where we're going further into the 19th century. All right. Happy to have you back if you haven't seen the MA Césaire ones. And there's the camera.